There's a reason you react the way you react, a reason certain things feel unbearable to you and completely normal to your parents. It's not personality, it's not upbringing. It's a hidden psychology shaped by the decade you grew up in. Right now, 6 generations share the same country, the same offices, the same families, and they're barely understanding each other. Not because they disagree, because they're running completely different mental operating systems, and no one got the manual. In 1923, a sociologist named Karl Mannheim published a paper that still haunts psychology today. The world doesn't shape all of us equally. It shapes you based on when you were born and what hit you between the ages of 10 and 25. This isn't another video calling boomers selfish or Gen Z fragile. And every generation developed its psychology for a reason. And when you see that reason, the judgment disappears. 6 generations, 6 hidden psychologies. By the end, you'll understand yourself and the people who frustrate you most in a way you never did before. And it all starts with the generation that changed everything by saying almost nothing. Picture a Thanksgiving dinner. Grandma thinks nobody works hard anymore. Dad says the economy was better when people had real careers. Your younger cousin is on TikTok under the table. And you, wherever you fall, are quietly convinced that everyone else is missing the point. Here's the thing. You're all right, and you're all wrong, because you're not arguing about the same world. Each person at that table is running a psychological operating system installed decades ago. Mannheim called it the non-contemporaneity of the contemporaneous. Same year, completely different psychological centuries. What follows is the story of 6 operating systems shaped in post-war America, where each generation inherited a world its parents couldn't have predicted. The silent generation, born between 1925 and 1945. Before they could vote, they had survived the Great Depression and a world war. In 1951, Time magazine gave them a name and got it spectacularly wrong. They called them silent, cautious, conformist. Silent? Martin Luther King Jr., born 1929. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 1933. Gloria Steinem, 1934. Bob Dylan, 1941. This was the generation that laid much of the groundwork for the civil rights movement, launched second-wave feminism, wrote the actual soundtrack of the counterculture, and then watched the boomers show up and take the credit. But here's the psychology underneath. When you grow up watching your family lose everything, and then your country sends your friends to die in Korea, you learn something that sticks. The world is fragile, and fragile worlds need strong institutions. Their hidden psychology wasn't silence. It was loyalty as a survival strategy. You build systems because when everything collapsed, only systems kept people alive. You change the world not by shouting, but by quietly laying bricks nobody notices until decades later. Then came the loudest generation in American history. 76 million babies, born into the greatest economic expansion the modern world had seen. Their parents had survived everything, so they wanted their kids to have everything. Suburbs, stability, the American dream, delivered to your doorstep. And then history intervened. JFK, assassinated. Martin Luther King, assassinated. Vietnam, Watergate. One by one, the institutions the silent generation had built cracked open. That collision, now between extraordinary promise and devastating betrayal, created a specific psychological response. If the system lied, then the only thing I can trust is myself. Individualism wasn't born with the boomers, but the boomers made it sacred. By the 70s, they were doing EST training, transcendental meditation, therapy marathons. Tom Wolfe called it the me decade. Then the 80s arrived, and something fascinating happened. The revolution put on a suit. The counterculture became corporate culture. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, both born in 1955, didn't just start companies. They crystallized the idea that one person with one vision could reshape the world. Their hidden psychology, the self as the ultimate project. When the world breaks, build yourself. And here's what that project looks like in 2026. A 73-year-old boomer who spent 40 years building a career, a reputation, and a retirement plan, watching the market erase a third of it overnight, again. He rebuilt himself after Vietnam. He rebuilt himself after the 80s. And now the world is asking him to do it one more time, except this time, the body says no. But he won't ask for help, because the whole point was that he didn't need any. And their children? Their children would inherit both the dream and the wreckage. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1979. 46 million Americans, and somehow the most invisible generation in the room. They were the latchkey kids. Mom went to work. Dad might not be around at all. You came home from school, pulled the key from around your neck, let yourself in, and made your own dinner. Imagine being 11 years old, watching your teacher cry as the Challenger breaks apart on live television. Imagine coming home one Friday to find out your dad's company, the one he built for 20 years, just closed. No warning, no safety net, a no explanation that made sense to a kid. You don't become cold, you become careful. You learn to stop expecting the next good thing to last, because nothing you've seen so far has. Watergate, the AIDS crisis, savings and loan scandals. By the time they were teenagers, every institution that was supposed to work had already failed, and nobody apologized. So Gen X did something brilliant. They stopped expecting. They invented whatever. And it was not apathy. It was the most rational response to a world that kept breaking its promises. And here's what whatever looks like in 2026. A 52-year-old Gen Xer, caring for a father with Alzheimer's, financing a 20-year-old's tuition, and training a coworker who might replace him, comes home on a Friday night and tells no one he's exhausted, because asking for help was a language no one taught him. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. The generation that trusted nothing, built most of the digital world you live in. Sergey Brin was 6 years old when he arrived in America as a Soviet refugee. No safety net, no playbook. He built Google in a rented room, not just from grand vision, but because figuring things out alone was the only skill his childhood had guaranteed. That's Gen X in a single biography. Google, YouTube, PayPal, Twitter, Uber, largely built by people who grew up letting themselves into empty houses. The last generation with a fully analog childhood constructed the digital world from scratch, when their hidden psychology, resilience through radical self-reliance. Don't expect anyone to save you, because no one will. The generation that never got applause built a stage where everyone else performs, and somehow they still haven't been invited to watch the show. Millennials, 1980 to 1994. The most studied, most criticized, most memed generation alive. They were raised on a beautiful promise. You are special, you can be anything. Participation trophies, helicopter parents, a childhood gift wrapped in bubble wrap and affirmation, and then September 11th, the war on terror, and then 2008, the worst financial crash since the Depression. Massive student debt, vanishing jobs. The future they'd been promised was empty inside. That collision didn't make them lazy. It triggered a strategic slowdown. Life history theory offers one lens. When the environment signals scarcity and uncertainty, humans tend to invest more carefully. They delay the big commitments, marriage, home ownership, children, not from immaturity, but from a rational recalibration. stagnant wages, soaring housing costs, and weakened safety nets did the rest. They invented the word adulting, not as a joke, as a survival vocabulary for a generation told the world was theirs and then handed a bill they couldn't pay. Their hidden psychology, optimism under siege. They still believe the future can be better. They just stopped pretending it'll be easy. Generation Z, born between 1995 and 2012, they didn't discover social media. They were born inside it. They had smartphones before driver's licenses. The algorithm knew their interests before their best friends did. And unlike every generation before them, they grew up being watched constantly by everyone, including themselves. In 2012, smartphone ownership in America crossed 50%. The data after that line is striking. Teen depression, anxiety, and loneliness all spiked. Researchers debate how much is driven by social media versus other pressures. But the correlation is hard to dismiss. The most connected generation in history became, by several measures, the loneliest. But here's what the stereotypes miss. Gen Z is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in American history. They came of age as marriage equality became law, as Me Too redefined power, when as the first Black president was already a childhood memory. They didn't debate whether gender was fluid, they lived it. They normalized conversations that previous generations had whispered, shouted over, or fought about for decades. And their humor, a coping mechanism disguised as absurdism, processing economic anxiety and ecological dread through the only language that feels honest, irony, their hidden psychology, radical authenticity under constant surveillance, trying to figure out who they are in a world that won't stop recording. And then, the newest humans, Generation Alpha, born after 2013, the first generation born entirely in the 21st century. They arrived into a world of climate crisis, record political polarization, a pandemic that stole their earliest years of socialization, and artificial intelligence entering their classrooms before they learned cursive. We don't fully know their psychology yet. They're still being written. But here's what's already clear. For every generation before them, technology was something you learned. For Alpha, technology is the water they swim in. AI isn't a disruption, it's a classmate. And here's the question no one can answer yet. When you grow up with a system that never disappoints you, never judges you, and seems to always have the right answer, do you still learn to trust imperfect humans? Every generation before them was shaped by what the world broke. Alpha might be the first shaped by what the world perfected. Their hidden psychology, still loading. 6 generations. 6 completely different operating systems, running on the same human hardware. And here's what most people never see. Not a single one of them is broken. Every hidden psychology, the silent loyalty, the sacred self-project, the radical self-reliance, the optimism under siege, the authenticity under surveillance, was the smartest possible response to the world the generation inherited. Mannheim saw it a century ago. Culture doesn't stagnate because new people keep arriving with fresh eyes and fresh questions. Each generation makes what he called fresh contact with reality. And that contact is what keeps the whole thing moving. So maybe understanding someone else's generation isn't tolerance, it's literacy. Or it's learning to read the invisible code that history wrote in someone else's brain and understanding your own. That's something rarer still. You didn't choose when you were born. You didn't choose what hit you between 10 and 25. But now you can see the architecture. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The question was never which generation got it right. The question is, what will you do now that you can read the code? If you recognize your own psychology here, or the psychology of someone you love, tell me in the comments. Which generation was the biggest surprise? Not yours, someone else's, the one you finally understood. The books and references behind this video are in the description. This is part of the Psychology and Who We Are playlist. A new video is twice a week, because at Tender Reason, understanding yourself is a lifelong project, not a passing trend.